welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, September 12th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to do a ton of breakdowns of games. I'll give my picks on some games, and we're going to start with a couple of SEC matchups this upcoming weekend. A&M heads down to Gainesville to face off against Florida in a game that really both of them need to win. Then we'll get Georgia at Kentucky for the second one there, and then we'll get to the second segment. We'll get into LSU out South Carolina, the game day game for this week, as well as Tulane going up to Norman to face off against the Sooners. Really fun matchups there that we'll break down. Then we have a couple of old Pac-12 matchups. We'll get into Oregon State at Oregon, as well as Washington State heading to Seattle to play Washington. Two really fun matchups against some teams that have a little bit of anger towards each other right about now. And then we'll get into some questions heading into Week 3. We did these yesterday. We'll continue them today. And then I have a couple of hot takes as we head into Week 3. A couple of things that I think might just happen this week that might just be a little bit out there. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. That is another way to do it. You can use that GSMCPodcast.net page if you would like. You can also use the super chat that is at the bottom of the chat, that little $sign. If you click on that, you can add any question, any comment you like, and it will pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. And definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so definitely utilize that. But let's go ahead and jump in here because we have a ton of picks to get to today. And we'll start with the game that's going on down in Gainesville, Florida this weekend, in a game that might just be must-win for both of these teams. Both of these teams are in such a weird spot as they head closer and closer to the meat of their schedule that a lot of them are going to have big-time questions. A lot of the fans are going to have big-time questions if they can't figure it out very quickly. So both these teams are walking in knowing that this is a huge game on their schedule, and if it goes wrong, then there's going to be a lot of fans that have a lot of questions, particularly around Florida, but A&M as well is going to have a ton of pressure on them in this game. But Elijah Badger is the first guy I want you guys to watch because I think this is a game where it sounds like Eugene Wilson is questionable right now. So if he does go, probably not out of the 100%. You need someone else to pick up that slack. Aiden Mizell is another great option here, but I think Elijah Badger brings something to this offense. He's getting more and more comfortable by the game, so I think he's going to be a dangerous player and definitely someone that can have a big-time effect on this game. And then this A&M O-line is where you want to attack them, and Tyreek Sapp is one of the few healthy edge rushers that they have. It sounds like TJ Searcy might just be out for this game as well, so they're going to need to find it somewhere, and Tyreek Sapp is likely the person that's going to have to do that, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they attack this A&M offensive line that has really struggled thus far, but I tend to believe Tyreek Sapp is going to have his handprint on this game if Florida's going to want to walk out there with a win. But Noah Thomas, they just have to get going over there at A&M. I don't know how this guy has not gotten the ball more often. He's 6'6", he can run all over the field, does really dangerous stuff, and you got a couple of wide receiver injuries right about now. So I would get the ball to this guy as consistently as you possibly can on Saturday because he is the big-time matchup problem for Florida going into this game, and I think he just needs to get the ball way more often for A&M going forward. And then Cassius Howell. We talked about the offensive line for A&M. The offensive line for Florida is downright rough as well. And I think Cassius Howell is going to get a lot of one-on-ones because a lot of attention is going to go Nick Scourton's way, that he might just be free to get those one-on-ones, and he can really dominate a good one-on-one. So a very, very talented player, one of those guys that hasn't quite hit the big-time ceiling that A&M had for him, but still getting accustomed to things. And I think this game could be kind of a coming-out party for Cassius Howell. But let's get into how Florida can pull off this upset. Obviously, the spread is only 4 in this game, so wouldn't be all that crazy if Florida was able to get this one done, especially being at home. But the biggest thing for me is let one quarterback lead the way. It sounds like Billy Napier is going to roll with Graham Mertz as the starter in this game, and I tend to believe that's the right way to go. I think Graham Mertz is the more confident, more comfortable option of the two, especially in a game where you have a very good defensive coach on the other side of the field, and we'll actually get into that here in a second. But the reality is, I do think you have to have one of these guys leading the way, the other guys being a supplemental piece or a break glass in case of emergency type piece. I think DJ Lagway is capable of getting them a win here, but at the end of the day, I don't think they should be rotating these guys drive after drive because then no one can get comfortable in that offense. And against a defense that is plenty good on its own, you don't want to give them any extra help. So it's going to be a little bit of a tightrope walk, but they have to find a way to figure it out. And then attack this O-line. I think A&M's O-line is the place that you want to go at. There's so many different things that you can attack at this group, and I think when you have Shamar James, when you have Tyreek Sapp, like we just talked about, there's so many guys that they can throw at them, but they might just want to get a little bit more dynamic. We saw what Connor Wegman had to deal with in the first week against Notre Dame. If you can heat him up, then I don't know if they have a full answer on offense. So if you can attack this O-line, if you can get after Connor Wegman, then all of this stuff for the A&M offense that has looked clunky in the first couple of weeks will look very, very clunky on Saturday. So we'll figure out what happens there, but I think you're going to have to collapse this pocket just a little bit to make Connor Wegman just a little bit uncomfortable to get this win. And then finally, don't let the crowd fall out of it. This is where the Miami game was lost largely. I think when you look at that game, there were a lot of fans that were coming into the season with hope. They were trying to buy themselves into what Florida can do this season. And then they just get kind of railroaded, and a lot of the energy was sucked out of that building very quickly, and they couldn't get back into it. And I think you have to make sure that, at the very least, give them a reason to stick around. Don't give them a reason to leave like a turnover or something crazy early on in this game. Try to go down and get a score, and then you have the entire swamp behind you. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they handle this. And then for the matchups, it's weirdly Billy Napier against his own situation. They're going to have to figure out how to rotate these guys as efficiently as they can, because it sounds like they want to play both. I don't necessarily love the idea, but it is an absolute tightrope walk for Billy Napier this upcoming weekend, and he's going to have to deal with it. And then Mike Elko versus DJ Lagway. Obviously, Graham Mertz is getting the start, but when DJ comes in that game, you best believe Mike Elko is going to try to cause a lot of problems for him. He's going to try to confuse him with coverages and get after him with the pass rush, and if he can, then maybe you get that one mistake that makes the difference. And then finally, the Florida wide receiver against the A&M DBs. I think these Florida wide receivers can get over top. They can get behind you, and especially with someone like DJ Lagway on the field, he can get him the ball deep down the field. So you're going to have to make sure you keep everything in front and tackle really efficiently in this game, because there are a couple of guys that'll make you pay in a hurry if you do not. But overall, I think Florida's just got too many questions for me to fully buy in. I really thought about picking Florida in this spot, I'm not going to lie to you, but I think with the quarterback situation going on, I think A&M's defense is going to play good enough, but it's going to be a pretty gross game from both these guys. I think they're going to both walk out feeling not so great, although A&M will get the win, so that'll subside that just a little bit. But let's keep it moving here. I do have A&M getting that win in Gainesville, huge conference win for them. But another conference game going on in the SEC, Georgia heading up to Lexington to face off against Kentucky. Kentucky has not gotten a win in this game since 2008 when Randall Cobb was running the offense. So it's been a little bit of time, but they're going to have to figure out how they can fix what happened last week and try to get on the right side of this thing, because it has been an absolute beatdown. Georgia's favored by 24 points right about now, and I don't necessarily think that's all that crazy. But they're going to have to figure out a way to get Brock Vandagriff going, and we'll see if they can do it. But guys to watch, Jamori Macklin is super important in this game. Brock Vandagriff needs to get going. Brock Vandagriff needs comfortable targets, and he is one of them. He has to be a guy that they can go to and feel confident in, and if he's not, if he can't get open against this back end, then Brock Vandagriff's not going to have a ton of places to go with the football, and he's going to have to start pushing it into some very uncomfortable situations. And then Zion Childress on the back end of this Kentucky defense. I think you talk about Georgia, they're going to try to spread you out. They're going to try to push the ball downfield whenever they get those opportunities. Childress is going to be huge in this game, both in run support, but also just keeping everything in front of him, making sure that he's reading Carson Beck's eyes, and then maybe getting that one pick that could possibly turn the tides. And then Lawson Lucky, I think, has become a really interesting player for Georgia because it's kind of zigging when everyone else is zagging. There's so many people to keep track of on this Georgia offense, so many wide receivers, so many running backs, and a couple of tight ends that you would think of before Lawson Lucky, that he's able to just sneak out there and get easy gains pretty comfortably. And I think that could be the game plan for Georgia. Let all of the wide receivers run crazy and then let these tight ends actually do the work of catching the ball and getting upfield. And then Jalen Walker, such a dangerous player and one of those guys that if Kentucky had problems with Dylan Stewart a week ago and Kyle Kennard, I think Jalen Walker and Michael Williams are going to have plenty to say. Although I'm not sure if Michael Williams is going in this game. He very well could not be. But Jalen Walker is going to do plenty to cause problems for that offensive line. And if he can get home at the same rate those two last week did, then it's going to be a problem for Kentucky. What Kentucky needs to do to win this one, Barrion Brown has to put on a show. He is the one guy that can change this game, both on offense and in special teams, and he's one of those guys that, frankly, you can have him perfectly played. You can play the perfect defense. He might just run away from you. So you have to make sure that this guy is under wraps, and for Kentucky, you got to make sure you get this guy going early and often. And if you don't, then you might just be in a little bit of trouble, and then slow this UGA run game as best you can. Now, this is no guarantee because Carson Beck can still dice you up pretty good, but the reality is if you let UGA run on you, the game is over. There's no reality where you're able to win this game if Georgia's able to impose their will throughout it. So you're going to have to live with the pass. You're going to have to live with the ball in Carson Beck's hands. Now, it's a nightmare of a situation where you have to pick between the two, but the reality is you're going to have to make sure that a mistake happens, and when that ball's in the air, you have a better chance of that mistake happening than when it's on the ground. That is for sure. And then finally, force that mistake. You got to force that mistake early. You have to be playing out in front in this game because if you're playing from behind, you have no shot to win it. I'm just being totally honest. Georgia's going to be able to keep everything in this offense under wraps, and you're not going to be able to get anything going, and then the crowd is going to fall out of this thing very, very quickly. So they got a lot of things to figure out, but get that mistake early, see what happens on the back end. But some matchups to watch that I think are really interesting. The Georgia O-line against the Kentucky D-line, two very good groups across the country, one of the two of the best groups across the country in these two categories, and I think it's going to be a really fun fight. Whoever wins this one is likely going to have a huge advantage in this game, and Kentucky likely needs to win this one if they want any shot in this game. The Georgia running backs against the Kentucky linebackers. Kentucky has a lot of athletic linebackers that can go out and guard a running back, can do a lot of the things you need them to do, and I think they're plenty for the task, but you have some very dynamic guys in that Georgia running back room, as you always do. So this is going to be an interesting battle, both running the ball and out of the backfield catching it. And then Brock Vandagriff facing off against his former head coach is going to be one of the more fascinating things this weekend. It's something that has started to happen in college football as the transfer portal has become more prevalent. We saw it with Riley Leonard against Mike Elko a couple of weeks ago, and that offense did not necessarily get going, and I don't necessarily expect anything different from Kentucky. I think Kirby Smart has a very good plan for the quarterback that he knows very, very well during his time at Georgia, but this one's a beatdown. I'm having a hard time seeing it any other way at this very moment. I think Georgia goes to work in this game. I think they prove to everyone they are still the number one team in the country, and anyone talking about Texas in that position is a little bit goofy. So I think they're definitely sending a message in this one and starting their SEC play the way that they normally do, which is beating someone by a ton. So I expect Georgia to win that one pretty comfortably, and we got a couple of really good ones there. I think the SEC getting underway this week adds a very, very interesting aspect to this week where a lot of these games could affect the rest of the year in the SEC, but we have one more for you next segment where we talk about LSU at South Carolina as well as Tulane heading up to Norman to play the new SEC team in Oklahoma. So we'll break those down right after this, so stick with us.